Hi, and welcome back to our learning of the Mishnah. We're learning Mishnah Shabbat. We're starting chapter 3. We're dealing with things having to do with cooking. Very important topic to get to when dealing with the prohibitions and what we need to do on Shabbat. And we're dealing specifically today with shehiyah, with leaving things on a fire. It's one of the methods we would use to have hot food on Shabbat. And the main concern when dealing with shehiyah is that someone is going to come to stir coals, is going to come to stir the coals and therefore heat up the fire, make it hotter, and therefore speed up the cooking process, which would be a prohibition. So we have to account for ways of making so that you're not going to come to stir the coals, and then it would be permissible to leave food on the fire into Shabbat. So we're going to have, basically, there's a couple of ways we can handle this. The main one is going to be, are we covering the quote-unquote coals, whether that's literally coals or something else, putting them out, cleaning them away, or are we putting food that is fully cooked and therefore there's no need to stir the coals so that we won't worry about that? Or are we putting food that's completely raw and therefore it won't be ready for Friday night, it'll only be ready for Saturday, so there's no reason to stir the coals. So that's a couple of ways in which we deal with shehiyah. So let's look inside now into the Mishnah and take a look at this discussion. Kira shehisikuha bikash uvigvava. So a kira, it's a type of stove. It would be like a double stove, so with places for two pots, and the more lenient kind of setup, and also what we're eventually going to equate our modern ovens and stoves with. So this kira that was heated with straw, with stubble, with other parts of the wheat stalk, the lower part or the upper part, notnin aleha v'tavshil. So you can put cooked food, you could put food upon it. Begefet uv'etzim lo yiten ad shigrof o ad shiyiten et ha'efer. So with gefet, which is the fuel source made from the pressed remnants of fruits that we press for the juice or the oil. So like, I guess the best example would be like olives. It's used the remnants of the olives after squeezing out the oil. Is actually can be used as a fuel source. So that gefet and eitzim wood, if that is your fuel source, then you cannot put the food onto the kira, onto this double stove until you have swept away the coals, or until you've put ashes over them. So until you've gotten rid of the heat source entirely, or made a clear sign that it's not to be stoked. The coals are not really in use anymore. It's just the remnants of the heat. There's not actually live coals anymore, because you have to make this with this heat source that's better for sustained heat, as opposed to the wheat that's just going to burn up very quickly, so there's no issue. As opposed to this more sustained heat source, you need to make it clear in some way that you're not going to come stir the coals, which would be the prohibition on Shabbat. Beit Shammai omrim chamin aval lo tavshil. So Beit Shammai says hot water, but not cooked food. So Beit Shammai is very concerned. So for water, there's no concern about stirring the coals because there's no additional cooking needed for water. But for food, Beit Shammai feel that it's an issue, that you might come to still stir the coals even if you've tried to account for it in other ways. Uveit Hillel omrim chamin v'tavshil. Beit Hillel says for either, it's okay. So as long as there's this clear indication that the coals shouldn't be stoked, or the food is completely cooked or completely raw, like we said, those would be the two statuses of the food that would be fine. Then Beit Hillel says both water and food, fine. Beit Shammai omrim notlin aval lo machazirin. Beit Shammai say we may remove the food, but we may not replace it. So this is the concern that maybe it'll come to look like cooking if you put the food directly on the fire as opposed to just leaving it there. Uveit Hillel omrim af machazirin. So Beit Hillel doesn't have this same concern as long as you have dealt with the issues of any issue of lest you come to stir the coal, you can also put the food back on, not just leave it on. Okay, going on to bet, tanor. So now we're dealing with a different kind of heating element. Tanor shehisikuhu vikash uvigvava lo yiten bein mitocho, bein mi'al gabav. So a tanor, an oven that was heated with straw or with stubble, the bottom of the straw. One may neither place food in it nor on it. So the tanor is a bigger concern than what we were dealing with before. We were dealing with the kira. So the kira, we said, was like a double stove. The tanor is a more narrow type of thing, so it has more intense heat that will last for longer. So we're maybe a little bit stricter with this tanor. So you shouldn't put the food on it nor in it if it has this even if it has this lesser heating source, heating fuel. Kupa shehisikuhu v'kash ubigvava hareze chichiraim. A single stove, a kupa, which is kind of, I guess, in between this tanor and kira. So kira being the most lenient, tanor being stricter, and kupach, being somewhere in between. So for that, this single stove, if you had the straw or the stubble, it would be it is like a double stove. It's like the kira, and with the stronger fuel sources, with the gefet, remember we said like the crushed olive remnants after squeezing out the oil, or with wood, which would burn better than the straw, then it would be treated like an oven, so meaning more strictly. So remember, we're dealing here with shahir, we're dealing with the idea of leaving food on the fire or putting it back onto the fire, chazara. That's another question that comes up in these texts. But the essential thing that we're dealing with is that we don't want you to come and stir the coals. So there's going to be a lot of practical things that we do on Shabbat to deal with these things. So we could say that a blech, the covering that a lot of people put on the fire, is like covering the coals. It's equivalent to that. We also say, some people would say that just a hot plate, a warming tray in and of itself is like that as well. Or some would say you need to put in an additional something. We also deal with these kinds of issues of coming to stir the coals by not, we don't have actually coals maybe with our things that we use to cook or to heat things up, but by achieving the same ends as covering the coals or putting ash over, or scraping away the coals, we achieve that with maybe putting a sign that makes it clear that we're not supposed to stir the coals, a heker, we call it. So, like, for example, removing the buttons removing the dial from the stove or from the crock pot, something like that. So we have different ways of dealing with this, but this whole thing has to do with lest you come to stir the coals. And also, like I said earlier, that the cookedness of the food is relevant, because if it's completely cooked, we're less worried about you coming to stir the coals, because you wouldn't want to make it worse. You wouldn't want to overcook the food. Why would you stir the coals to make it hotter? And if something is completely raw, that you put on Friday right before Shabbat, then there's no way I could have it for Friday night, even if I do stir the coals, so I'm not going to do that, because this is going to be for Saturday day. So those are some of the ways in which we deal with these issues, and we'll continue our learning about cooking questions in Mishnah Shabbat next week. All the best. Bye.